My name is Cleo Francine Wilson. I'm a history maker. I served from 1982 to 2005 as the executive director of the Playboy Foundation, a corporate giving program of Playboy Enterprises, Inc. I thought I had retired in 2005, but in 2006, I took another position as executive director of Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Art. It's a small museum that is focused on the work of untrained and self-taught artists. I retired from that position in 2012. I don't know if I'm typical or whether this is true of other older Black women, but I had no role models per se. My role models were the mothers and grandmothers and aunties and cousins who were all around me trying to make a way out of no way. The stellar women that I later heard about later in life seemed at that time to be beyond my aspirational grasp. So when I started looking for heroes and heroines, I went to books. And I loved reading novels, and especially science fiction, because the further away from reality it could take me, the better. And it was there that I discovered the work of Octavia Butler. She's a fabulous writer, and I was thunderstruck by her tales, her characters, her passion, and her amazing creativity. Octavia Butler was a brilliant writer, almost unknown to all but more hardcore fans of science fiction. She was critically acclaimed and a formidable talent, but her writing is more relevant today than it was nearly 45 years ago when she began. She would be the first African American woman to win both the Hugo and Nebula Awards for science fiction writing, and she was honored with a MacArthur Genius Grant, the only science fiction writer to get such a grant. Octavia was born June 22nd, 1947 in Pasadena, California. She was an only child. She lost her father at a young age and was raised in a very strict household by her mother and grandmother. Her mother worked as a maid to support them all. As a child, Octavia was known for her extreme shyness and her impressive height. She was also dyslexic, but she didn't let these challenges deter her from developing a love of books and a love of writing. She started writing her own stories and to make writing her life's work at the age of 10. So she was a precocious and very talented young woman. She later earned an associate degree from Pasadena City College, and she honed her craft at the Clarion Fiction Writers Workshop, a 6-week workshop for aspiring science fiction and fantasy writers. To make ends meet, Octavia took all sorts of jobs while maintaining a very strict writing schedule, often writing up until the middle of the night. In 1976, she published her first novel, Pattern Master. This book would ultimately become part of an ongoing storyline about a group of young telepaths with powers, and they were known as patternists. In 1979, Octavia had a breakthrough with her novel Kindred, which many of you may know. This novel tells the story of an African-American woman, Dana, who lives in present-day California, but time travels to an antebellum plantation in the South, and eventually she is there to save the white slave owner who is her ancestor, and in saving him, she makes it possible for her present-day family to exist. In part, Octavia drew inspiration from her mother's work. I didn't like seeing her go through back doors, she said to an interviewer in the New York Times. If my mother hadn't put up with those humiliations, I wouldn't have eaten very well or lived very comfortably. So I went to write a novel that would make others feel the history, the pain, the fear that Black people had to live through to endure. The other related titles in the Patternist series were printed in 1977, Mind of Mine, 1980, Wild Seed, and Clade's Ark in 1984. This group of books would later be put together as the Patternist series and published in a series different from the way they originally were published chronologically. In 1995, Octavia received a Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation, and this allowed her to buy a home for her mother and herself. Though that MacArthur grant made her life easier, she continued to struggle for decades to find a market for her dystopian novels, exploring themes of racism, gender, climate change, politics, and slavery. Her novels also centered on Black women during a time when there were very few African American science fiction writers, and even fewer writing books with lead characters who were always African American women. In 1999, Octavia abandoned California and moved to Seattle. She was a perfectionist and spent many years dealing with writer's block. Her efforts were hampered by ill health and the medications that she felt blocked her creativity. After starting and discarding numerous projects, Octavia wrote her last novel, Fledgling, in 2005. Was an innovative take on the concept of vampires and family structures. Interest in her books were beginning to rise, and in recent years, sales of her books have increased enormously. Octavia passed away on February 24, 2006. She was only 58 years old. With her death, the literary community lost one of its greatest storytellers. Her work is now taught in colleges and universities nationwide. Her novel, Dawn, is being developed for television by Ava DuVernay. An opera by Toshi Reagan based on the parable of the sower was part of the Public Theater Under the Radar Festival and toured worldwide in 2018. And Amazon students recently announced that it was partnering with Viola Davis and Julius Tenen to develop a drama from the Patternist series. And even weeks ago, FX announced that it ordered a pilot based on the novel Kindred. A few short weeks ago, on March 5th, 2021, NASA named the Mars landing site of the Perseverance rover, Octavia E. Butler Landing. With her 6-foot height and a deep, distinctive voice that made listeners lean in to hear her every carefully chosen word, Octavia was a true giant in life, and her power and impact have continued to grow since her death in 2006. I am delighted to present acclaimed science fiction writer Octavia E. Butler to the HistoryMakers audience.